on break at work, and I said, you can't figure everything out in your head. My God is bigger than you. He has a plan for you. No, no, no. And he lived his life that way. If you don't know and understand that God has a plan and purpose, your life, you live a life without meaning. And God didn't call any of you to live a life without meaning. You're important to him. So we live in a corner of the United States. Not much happens here. Listen, you're important. You're important. And you're going to touch people that only you can touch with your life. There was a man who was walking on the beach in Australia, and he saw a boy that was the tide had gone out, and there were starfish out there. If you know anything about starfish, they dry out, and die after very long without water. And there was a boy out there ripping starfish off the rocks as they're drying out, throwing them as far out into the sea as he could. And the guy said, "Listen, with all the starfish here and they're all dying, you're not going to make a difference." And the kid turned and looked at him and said, "It makes a difference to that one. It makes a difference to that one." And each one he pulled because it makes a difference to this one. You might think that you're insignificant, but you're not. You're significant in God. In every single step you take, and every person you touch, and everything that comes across your life, everything that happens in your life is not God ordained, but the things that he set up that you run across, it's important that you're there. It's important that you're there. So why is it important? Well, there was one time Ezekiel said this. The Lord spoke to him and said, I looked across the world for someone to stand in the gap, and I couldn't find him. There's times that God's looking for somebody to pray, and he needs you. Right. There's times that he might need somebody to share the gospel. He needs you. You might be the only one that could get to that place. Well, but Pastor, we're not in New York City or Los Angeles. There's not that many people. Listen, he needs you. He needs your voice. He needs your voice. He needs your life, and you're important, and he has a purpose and a plan for you. If you're going to follow God's plan, you have to understand that he does have a purpose. And we're going to talk about 4 things this morning. They're going to help you follow God's plan. Understand this. He does have a purpose for you. Ephesians 2:10 says this, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." Did you know God has things that you haven't walked out for you yet? And it doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are. I remember my junior year of high school. I stopped playing. No, I take that back. It was my senior year of high school. Forgive me. But it was in the 80s. So I had stopped playing varsity basketball at high school, and so I was able to play in the city league. My cousin started the city league team. He got yelled at every time saying that the kid playing high school basketball wasn't supposed to be playing. I'm like, I'm not playing. So they're like, it stinks. Anyway, there was a guy that was a couple years ahead of me that graduated that was playing with us, and it was supposed to be a church team, and I didn't think he was serving God. I didn't. I just had this impression he wasn't, even though he'd gone and visited the church a few times. They'd ask him to play, and I just remember after we'd played one night, I'm going to my car to go home, and he's standing out there, and I was like, "Jared, do you need a ride?" It's like, "Yeah." So I'll give him a ride home, and I don't know how. I don't remember how the conversation got going, but the only thing I know is that all of a sudden I looked at my watch, and I'd been sharing the things of God with him. It was like 11:30 on a school night. We've been talking for 2 to 3 hours out there, and we kind of prayed quick, and he went in. And the next Sunday, I got a report that he went down and rededicated his life to the Lord. He'd come to Christ years earlier, backslid, and I didn't know it. And they said he got up and repented in front of his church. It was a Foursquare church. He repented, and last I tracked down, now the rest of his family didn't serve God at all. His mom and dad were hippies. His brother that was in my grade that had been a great friend of mine was a drug addict, and the younger one, I don't know what happened to him, but I know that he came from a place where nobody served God that he knew. And the pastor told me later, he said, and I don't know where he went, but he told me later, he said he wouldn't have come down and rededicated his life had you not spent time with him that night. And it just happened that we played basketball. We're there one night, and we talked, and I looked him up a number 8 or 10 years ago, and 30 years later, he's still serving God. Now let me just say, I'm not taking all the credit for it. at all. But God used me to be in that place just as a 16, 17-year-old kid, to be in the right place at the right time to share the gospel. God's got places and avenues and things set up for you, that he needs you, and he has a purpose for you. I love what this says in the Passion Translation. It says, we have become his poetry, a recreated people that will fulfill the destiny he has given each of us. For we are joined to Jesus, the Anointed One. Even before we were born, God planned in advance our destiny and the good works we would do to fulfill it. Isn't that powerful? You know, I don't know how that's going to happen. Well, understand this. God's bigger than you are. God's bigger than you are, and he has a purpose for you. And your purpose is not going to be the same as my purpose, and my purpose is not going to be the same as somebody else's purpose, but you have a purpose in this world. You're not here by accident. And the people that think, and let me just say this, I'm reiterating this, and I know I'm repeating myself. People that think they're here by accident will go in circles through their lives being frustrated. And they get out of their place. What happens? What does purpose do? Purpose gives you a focus. Purpose gives you a mindset. Purpose gives you a lane that you're to walk in. Why? Because I got to go. I'm going somewhere. God's got a purpose and plan for me. And you know what? When you see, a lot of people too, they'll deny the purpose. You ever heard people says, "I won't do this. I won't do this. I don't want to do this." And they're arguing with God about what they will and won't do. As long as you're arguing about God's purpose, you're gonna go around like an merry-go-round. And because why? Because you won't have any focus. You won't know. But once you step into the line and say, Lord, I'm open for you, whatever you have for me. I'll do what you want me to do with your life. God will direct your steps, and he's promised that. He's promised to direct your steps. And if you're nervous, and this was my thing, and I was telling Melanie and I were talking the other night. We were riding somewhere. My daughter, my number 3 child, second daughter. We were talking about when I went to Bible school. I told the Lord all the way down there what I wasn't going to do. I was going to Christ the Nation. So it was 34 years ago this week, or actually a couple weeks earlier, but this month, 34 years ago, my dad and I drove down to Oklahoma, saw my sister, then we drove to Dallas and went to Bible school. And I didn't tell my dad, didn't tell my sister, or anybody else, but I was giving the Lord a list of things I was not going to do. I'm not going to Guatemala. I'm not going to Haiti. I'm not going to Africa. I'm not even going to Europe. And I'm like, I'm barely admitting that I'm even going to minister at all. And then I decided, okay, well, find a large church where I can get a paycheck, and I'll work as an assistant pastor or a youth minister somewhere, and that's going to be about it. Well, none of those things have happened in my life. But the one thing that did happen is after about 6 months in Bible school, I finally dropped it, and I said, Lord, I'll do whatever you want with my life. And it's been the biggest blessing. I've got friends all over the world. I've gotten to do things that I would have never got to do had I been focused strictly on making a living and money. The ministry is not those who preach the gospel are to live by it, but this was not a means to the ends. Preaching the gospel wasn't a way for me to get money. You could do that anywhere. Preaching the gospel is a life calling, and it's a purpose. Let me look at one other verse here. If you're going to fulfill your purpose, there's something else you got to know. It says, therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Did you know that God is not hiding his will from you? He's not hiding his will from you. People say, I don't know what the will of God is. Well, don't admit that, because then you're saying you're unwise. This is a current thing with a lot of our younger generation. They find it socially acceptable to go around talking about how confused they are. Now, older people do that too, but I find this a lot. Not in my family necessarily, but you find this in people. Pastor, I'm so confused. I'm so confused. I'm so confused. I don't understand. I don't understand. Well, don't be unwise is what Paul said. And there's a connection here, so follow me on this one. But understand what the will of the Lord is. So his will is not that hard to find out. So one thing, don't be drunk with wine. So if you're drinking, you're going to have some confusion. They're tied together. Guess still out there. If you're getting drunk, you might have an issue here in the will of God. Well, Pastor, I didn't say you're going to hell, and I didn't say you're a bad person. You guys still out there? Don't be drunk with wine, which is which is dissipation, but what? Be filled with the Spirit. There's a connection between knowing the will of God and being full of the Spirit of God. There is a connection between knowing the will of God and being full of the Spirit of God. Speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Listen, worship is a big part of knowing the will of God. For me, many, not every single time, but many times, the understanding of what I was to do came up in my heart when I was worshiping. When I was worshiping, all of a sudden, I get an inward, I'm supposed to do this. And it comes to the word too. When you're hearing the word of God, it'll come the same way. You guys still there? You get this picture. All of a sudden, I'm supposed to do this. You just know it. Well, that comes from being full of the Spirit of God will come on you when you're hearing preaching. The Spirit of God will come on you, move through you when you're worshiping. And a lot of people don't take the time to do that. Once a week is not enough. Once a week is not enough. You guys awake this morning? There is a connection between fulfilling your purpose and being full of the Spirit of God. You need the Holy Spirit's help. We have to have it. You won't make it otherwise. Listen, good plans are good. You can make all your strategies, write them down, but if the Spirit of God's not involved, you'll get frustrated. Amen. Secondly, the second thing you're going to need is patient persistence. Now, when I was in Bible school, Christ of the Nations, the first Bible school I went to, Christ of the Nations, they still do this. You took 4 classes. You took 4 classes, 4 classes a semester plus, and there were 16-week courses. Plus, had every day they called it lectures in contemporary theology. They've changed the name of it now. And that was they would have a guest minister come in, and every day from 11 to 12 would preach. And sometimes most of the time that was fantastic. Occasionally it was interesting. That's about as critical as I'm going to sound. Sometimes it was interesting, but most of the time it was fantastic. But there was something that unique would happen. And when you saw this, Pastor Mike Massa, who administered here a few years ago, he said this: listen, if you go to your first hour class and it's on Old Testament survey, and we'll just use this word for an example, they talk on mercy. And then you go to your second hour class and it's on missions and they teach on mercy. And then the guest minister who comes in doesn't have anything to do with the school, comes from somewhere else, and he teaches on mercy. You might want to wake up and go, like, God's talking about mercy. And you would see this. You would see that with mercy. You see this with grace. You would see it with faith. You would see it with missions. You would see it with all sorts. You would see it with healing. You would see it with all sorts of different things, different subject matters, different teachers that weren't communicating with each other, and guest ministers coming in from a different planet, practically, sometimes spiritually speaking, would all end up teaching on the same thing the same day or 3 days in a row. And when you see that, you'd be like, oh, God's saying something. Now, let me say this. We've been touching patience over and over for the past few weeks. Why is that? Some of you are in some battles that's going to take a little while to get through. I'm not trying to prophesy negativity over you. There's something about a patient endurance that's going to help you overcome. And so I'm just saying that I didn't sit down any of the last month or so and say, you know what, we really need to focus on patience. But every preparation time, similar verses keep coming up in my spirit as your pastor. And it's like, okay, the Lord's saying something to us as a congregation. He's saying something. So anyway, so when you see this, I'm not just regurgitating old messages over the last few weeks or reusing the same verses and because I don't have anything better to say. This is what the Spirit of God's saying to us. This is why we're talking about this. But if you're going to follow God's plan for your life, you're going to finish your course, we're going to have patient endurance. We're going to have patient persistence. You're going to have to be persistent. You can't quit. And you can't expect things to change instantaneously, or you can't even expect to fulfill your destiny instantaneously. Hebrews 6:12 says this, that you do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. We looked at this twice over the last month or so, this verse. What happens? Because if you don't see things happening as fast, and we see this happen all the time, if you don't see things happen as fast as you want, you start to it's never going to change. It's never going to change. Why is it always going to be this way? Where's God? Where's God? Where's God? It's never, and you get the little limp-armed attitude, and you get sluggish. But what happens? If you look in Hebrews 11, which is 5 chapters later, we can count 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 6 to 11. Many of these people waited a long time for God's plan to come to pass in their life. You know, think about Moses, who didn't enter into the ministry till he was 80 years old. He had 80 years of preparation time. 40 years in school in Egypt and 40 years on the backside of a desert to get humble. And to learn to trust God and to learn how to be a shepherd. You guys still there? You think about Abraham. We always talk about the fact he was 100 when he had a kid, but it was 25 years of believing God and believing the promise of God. 25 years of him believing and trusting God. How many of us get impatient after a week if we don't see the answer show up instantaneously? Listen, part of the battle is you just enduring and being patient and not quitting and just continuing to hammer things with the Word of God in your prayer life. And just saying, I'm not quitting, I'm going forward, I'm going forward. I don't feel anything today, but I'm going forward. Listen, I don't see anything changing, but I'm still going to do what God's called me to do. There's something about the person who can get up and just put one foot in front of the other each and every day and just say, God, I'm here for you, and this is what your word says, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be faithful to do what you told me to do. I don't feel anything different, but I'm not moved by that. I'm just going to keep going. It's amazing how feelings will follow faith if you'll just do what you're supposed to do. And listen, God made us emotional. I know that. I know that, but we're not to live by those. We're not to be directed by those. You guys still with me? Therefore, you do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. See, what a lot of people do is they're looking for a single event that's going to change everything, or they're trying to run off, and God does call us to move from time to time and do different things. But it's interesting. King Saul, when he got anointed by Samuel, he's like, what do I do now? Samuel said, go back, do what your hand finds to do. And he went back and took care of his dad's flocks. Yeah. And a while later, there was an opportunity where Israel went to war, and the Spirit of God came on Saul, and he became the man of God and the leader that he was supposed to be. But up until from the time he was anointed until that, what was he doing? He's back at his dad's house doing what he's supposed to do. David had the same thing. He got anointed by Samuel, same prophet, anointed David, and it was about 13 years before he became king of Hebron, and a little bit longer he became king of Israel. What did he do in the meantime? We find out he was taking care of the sheep. Found out he delivered bread and cheese to his brothers. He started fighting the battles that were placed in front of him. He got a reputation of being a man of valor. He actually worked for King Saul. And see, a lot of people aren't faithful. I had this. There was a young lady that we sent out. I'm not going to say where, but we sent out to go to Bible school, and she came back, and I had somebody call, and they said, "Listen, she shouldn't be in your church anymore. She needs to go." And I'm like, "I've never seen her be faithful." Told the organization. They're like, "What do you mean?" I said, "She's never come to church more than 1 week in a row since she's been here, maybe 2. She always is gone. She's never been faithful. She's never helped. She's never done anything." I said, as her pastor, I can't send her to the mission field. I haven't seen her be faithful here at all. I said, you don't even know her. I said, how long has she spent with you? 2 weeks. And I'm like, I said, I don't doubt that she's anointed. I don't doubt that she's called. Matter of fact, that's why we sent her to Bible school. The reason we sent her there is because she's called and anointed. But there's also a side called faithfulness, putting your hand to something. And I can't put my hand on her to send her overseas when I haven't seen her been faithful here for even a month. Well, he's like, how dare you say that? I'm like, listen, how long have you known her? Well, I met her a month ago. I'm like, yeah, okay, I've known her for years now, and I've never seen her be faithful. So before you lecture me on my people, you might want to get to know them. You guys still there? You're still out there. I love this verse. 1 Corinthians 7:20 says this: so everyone should continue to live faithful in the situation of life which they were called to follow Jesus. So this is where you can take a deep breath. Just because you say yes to the plan of God in your life doesn't mean that tomorrow he's sending you to Tanzania. You're not going to Ghana tomorrow. What's he saying? I say, yes, so we'll be faithful where you're at. When we finished our 5th year, Shelley and I finished our 5th year Bible school, we were in Oklahoma where Lindsay's getting ready to go. And I was happy. I said, Lord, I'll stay here if you want me to. I didn't feel like we were supposed to, but what do you want me to do? And it came up, the Lord said, I need you to be faithful in a local church before you send you out. And I was happy. We would have stayed in Oklahoma, but that wasn't the Lord. He had us move to Nashville and work in a church for almost 2 full years before they sent us. And what did we do there? We got there the first night. They said we need help in children's ministry. I was at a staff meeting with the pastor's son, and Shelley told me, she said, if they need any help in children's ministry, tell them I'll help. And so the children's minister, Bill Adcock, which it's on my heart, I need to get him to come out and minister for us sometime. But he's sitting there and he goes, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't have anybody to take the 2-year-old class. And I was like, my wife, well, she told me to tell you that if you guys need any help, and they all looked at me like I was a nut job. They're like, what? We didn't even know you guys. Well, we're here to help. And then I told Pastor, I said, what do you need help in? He goes, I need someone to go to the prison every week. We've got a couple guys to go, but we need a team, not just 2 guys going. I'm like, all right, I'm down. Once again, I didn't like it. Matter of fact, I've told you this. That wasn't my calling, wasn't my gift, but I got asked to do something, and you have a choice at that point, faithful or not. I felt like I had to take a shower after every Monday night. There's nothing like getting in the elevator after you've been patted down and you have to check everything in, and you get on the elevator and there's dirty underwear and half-eaten burritos and you can't even begin to fathom how disgusting it was to go up there. We almost got caught in a lockdown one night too, which was interesting. So I'm not complaining right now. I'm just letting you know I didn't do it because it was fun and exciting. I did it because I was being faithful. I got asked to do something by my pastor. Then they asked me to teach Sunday school. Well, that was great. Taught Sunday school, and then they asked me to do some other stuff, and asked Shelley to do some stuff. And by the time we left, I went back. It was 8 or 9 years ago. Went back and was talking to some people, and one of the ladies in the church, I saw her long story. I saw her at a meeting. She came up. She goes, "We were just talking about you. That you and Shelley left a deeper deposit in the church than anybody that ever came through there." She goes, in a 2-year period, you left a deeper deposit, and things that you guys impacted. We're still blessed by you guys coming and being sent out. 10 years or 15 years later, we still talk about the fact that you guys left a big deposit there. Well, you got to be faithful. The Living Bible paraphrase says this: usually a person should keep on with the work that he was doing when God called him. You know what happens is when you're faithful, God doesn't necessarily promote you to full-time ministry, but nothing else will come if you can't be faithful doing what you're supposed to do right now. And then sometimes, we see Stephen in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 6. Stephen was just a deacon, but he was full of the Holy Spirit being a deacon. And then God called him to be out. Same thing with Philip in that same spot. Philip was a deacon, and he became an evangelist. Had a great revival. You see guys that, no, listen, the rest of the guys, what did they do? They were still deacons in the church. You're still there? Everybody wasn't called out, but a couple of them, God said, you know what, I've got more for you, but they wouldn't have gotten there had they not been faithful first. The other ones, they don't get any less reward for being faithful working in the church if that's what their call was. You guys, just because one's seen and one's not seen doesn't mean there's any less reward. God has different plans and purposes for each of you. The other guys, it may have been God's plan for them to be a deacon in the church for the rest of their life. You know what? They get huge reward if they're faithful and do it full of the Spirit of God. Just to be a deacon means what? They're at that point, that word just meant they were helping in the church. They were distributing funds to widows and working in their soup kitchen. That's what a deacon meant at that point to them. There's different applications and meanings in different churches, but that's what they were doing. They're working the soup kitchen, they're feeding widows, and they're doing what the apostles needed done so they could focus on preaching the gospel. And that was their call. You guys still there? You awake this morning? Let me just say this: a life of impact generally does not happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight. I'm going to talk on something else here, but sometimes, you're going through your life and you're just living your life. And ever so often it's good, if you've been a believer for years, it's good to sit back and remember how God's used you. I've told us, ever so often we'll just get a note from somebody, an email or a Facebook message, or says, you know what, you touched my life years ago and you did that. I forgot that God used you in that season. And you realize as you go forward that God has used you and that your life has made a bigger impact than you ever think. A life of impact will not happen overnight. You have to have patient persistence. How many of you ever seen a Dyson hand dryer and you go into airport or into a grocery store, those things? Well, those things started by a guy named John Dyson, who actually started making, the bagless vacuum. And he's actually done a lot more than that. But I looked at it this morning. His company is worth $13.7 billion right now. 13.7. He's in the top 20 richest man in the world. Well, back in 1985, had you ever heard of a Dyson hand dryer or a Dyson vacuum? Or any of the other stuff that they've done? No. Well, he had an idea. He had an idea for a bagless vacuum. That was his idea. And you know what happened? He got sued and he got attacked by all the vacuum companies because the way that they make money is on selling bags. And you'd think, he probably just had an idea and got it and it was good. Well, you know how many prototypes he had? Not one, maybe 10, maybe 50. He had 5,127 prototypes. And it took him 14 years that he rang up a bunch of debt and got sued multiple times, been attacked, to get his product out. 5,127 prototypes, which means what? 5,126 of them didn't work right. Do you think it was worth it for him to persevere? I don't know what a spiritual content. I'm just talking about it just in general. A lot of times we think, well, I'm just going to get there and it's going to be, no. 14 years and over 5,000 prototypes before he finally started getting his vacuum in a store. And he had one to start, not the 10 that you see now. He had one. And he was still getting sued and he was still getting attacked and getting criticized by all the other companies that they wanted to be able to sell their bags. Yet today, he's made quite an impact on the world. You go to Costco, what do you see? Dyson vacuums over. You go to not the grocery store, but you go to the department store, go to the vacuums, you're always going to see a Dyson vacuum. Why? Because he persisted. He was patient when it didn't look like anything was ever going to work out for him. If you're going to follow the God's plan for your life, you have to have patient persistence. Things don't always change instantaneously. They don't change overnight. And your impact will be greater if you'll just stay with it. You can't quit. You can't get off track. Keep going. You got to keep going. Number 3, if we're going to follow God's plan, you have to pray. Prayer is a necessity. Prayer is a necessity. We've looked at Ephesians 6 quite a bit in the last few months. And it's a powerful verse. Remember, your battle is not with people. Your battle's not with people, even if they seem to be your problem. You guys still there? That's why the Lord tells us to forgive and walk in love, because people are not your issue. Even if they've been mean to you, even if they hurt you, even if they've attacked you, they're still not your issue. There's an enemy motivating them, and sometimes the enemy motivates Christians. How can you say that? Well, have you ever yielded to the devil in your life? If you yielded one time, you don't be judgmental of somebody else. We got to forgive. But Ephesians, you could read the whole chapter. It bear, especially verse through 7 through the end of the chapter. But verse 18 says this: praying always with all prayer. Everybody say all prayer. All prayer and supplication in the Spirit. Supplication is literally just it's the prayer petition is when you stand on the Word and you keep just standing on the Word over and over. Supplication is basically doing that for others. And that's not the only interpretation, but it's really that you're standing and you're lifting up other people and you're praying. Once again, there's more meanings to that. That's a general, people like to talk about intercession. Intercession really is more the staying of judgment. People like to use that all the time and say, I was interceding for you. Well, I was about to get judged. Wow. No, you're probably supplicating for them, but we don't like to use that term for whatever. It doesn't sound as sexy as intercession. That's a joke. I'm seeing if you're awake. Just seeing if you're awake. Intercession sounds like all exciting. Supplication doesn't, but supplication is what you're just you're standing praying for people. Doesn't mean I'm not judging anybody that, well, so-and-so used intercession. We're not critical. We're just letting you know the specific meanings of the words. But praying always with all prayer and supplication, how in the Spirit, being watchful to this end with all perseverance and supplication for all the saints. So a couple of things we see. You're going to have to pray in the Spirit, watch and pray, persevere, and pray for the saints. But the rest of the chapter goes on talking about you're also in a battle. There's an enemy. You guys awake this morning? I believe it was Jerry Odell that told this, but I heard a story about T.L. Osborne. Jerry Odell was his son-in-law. T.L. Osborne was one of the greatest missionaries that's lived since the time of Bible times. He's preached to more people. He preached to more people than I believe any other minister in the last ever, actually, but at least in the last 100 years. He actually has way surpassed Bill Graham and some of the other great evangelists. How do you know that? Because he had one meeting in India where he had almost 2 million people at the meeting. He had meetings in Africa where literally there'd be 500,000 to 600,000 people at one meeting, and thousands, not tens, not hundreds, thousands of people would come to Christ. Of Muslims, of Hindus in different parts of the world, of Buddhists. And what would happen, I believe this was Jerry Odell, but if I'm wrong on the name, forgive me, but his crusade director would go in months in advance before the meeting. And he would go and he would set up whether they were going to rent a giant field, and they'd have to get it taken care of by the government, or a football stadium, like a soccer stadium, or a bull ring, for bullfighting. They would use those arenas for that, whatever they were going to use. Obviously, when you have a couple million people in one meeting, you have to use a field somewhere. But there was always government regulations. There's always things you have to go through and hoops to jump through. And he made this statement. He said, not one time did I go in to set up a crusade for TL that everything went smooth. Nearly every single time I would get there and we would come to a pass where it wasn't going to work. There was a government official that wasn't going to let this happen. We couldn't lease it. We couldn't do this. They were not going to give us any permission. And every single time I would have to go back to my hotel and call out to God all night long, only to see breakthrough come the next day. Every single one. Never once did I get there and I was like, well, we just walked through and we had a crusade. Why? Well, there's an enemy. Doesn't want the gospel preached. And if you're going to fulfill your destiny, fulfill your purpose, get the victory of the battle you're fighting, you are going to have to pray. There's no other way around it. And I heard someone say this recently. He made the statement, he said, if you're not praying, you're straying. So we'll say that to us. If we're not praying, we're straying. If you don't pray, you'll stray. You'll get off of your purpose. You'll get off the plan of God. You'll give up in the middle of the battle. You have to pray with perseverance and supplication. Pray with perseverance. You guys still there? And then lastly this morning, doesn't mean we're done, but just the message. Lastly, we got to walk with perspective. There, in 2 Timothy, the 2nd chapter, verses 3 through 6, it gives us a perspective of 3 attitudes we have to have. And when I was studying this, I ordered a book. I haven't read it yet, but there's a missionary to the Philippines by the name of Paul Chase. He ministered in our church in Nashville when we were there, and he has a book out called "The Soldier, the Athlete, and the Farmer." There's 3 attitudes we have to have. I got to sit by. I just got it on like Thursday or Friday this week. I remember a ministry on this, but there's 3 attitudes we have to have, which will give us perspective. You have to have the attitude of a soldier. You have to have the attitude of an athlete, and you have to have the attitude of a farmer in your life as a Christian. You won't make it without these perspectives. True. Therefore, everybody say, that means me. You, therefore, must endure hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. You must endure hardship as a good soldier. What's that mean? It means that everything's not going to be easy every day. Well, I want it to be easy. Well, his yoke is easy, his burden is light. That doesn't mean you're not going to be in the battle. You know what? I skipped something. As I said that, I just remembered. Isaiah 55:2 says this: "Why spend money on that which is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me. Eat what is good, and you'll delight in the richest fare." Um, there is a satisfaction in your spirit. We'll say this. We'll connect these 2 points together. There's a satisfaction in your spirit when you know that you're doing what God called you to do. So when you know, and it might just be a short-term step, or it might be the overall, but when you know this is what God's asking me to do right now, there's a satisfaction that comes that money can't buy, that nothing, that all the pleasures of this world don't get there. And you can hear it over and over through testimonies of people, that have done so many things, but then they're miserable inside. You guys there? Well, the same thing with perspective, and we'll say this. You can be in the battle, but have peace in your heart knowing that this is what God's called you to do. And there's a satisfaction in your heart knowing this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. The battle's here, but I'm not going to complain because I've got a heart satisfaction from what I'm supposed to do. So having that God satisfaction doesn't eliminate challenges in your life, doesn't eliminate battles that you might have to fight. It just knows that in the middle of that, you have peace. And when you know that you're supposed to do it, there's also peace that'll bring victory in your life if you won't quit. You must endure hardship as a good soldier. No one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life that he may please him who enlisted as a soldier. A couple things with this. Soldiers, first of all, they train for weeks for a short-term period. You guys still there? Yeah. They train for something that's not even a long. Most there are some lifers, but most soldiers are only in it for a short time. But the attitude is this: I've got to learn, and I've got to be prepared for whatever the enemy is going to throw at me. You guys there? Secondly, when a soldier is in war, they don't get the option. They don't have time. They don't get the option to complain about where they're at. You guys still there? Why? Because all they're doing is they got to keep their head. They got to keep their head up for one more day. And you've got to be alert. And you've got to be. You don't have time to complain. You don't have time. Why? Because the moment you start to complain and throw your helmet down is the moment your head's going to get taken off by a mortar or by a bullet. Or as Mike Warnke said, he got shot with an arrow in the middle of a firefight in Vietnam. He's like, everybody else is getting shot and an arrow hits me in the arm. It's like you got to pay attention. And thirdly, what does it say? That he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. Remind yourself of this with God's purposes. It's not all about you. Our purpose is to please him. And if our commanding officer, our Savior, is pleased with us, listen, things are going to be good. Right. Amen. And you're going to be happier when he's pleased with you. But if you're every single day, well, for one, if you're going AWOL every day, it's not going to help you. There's a lot of Christians that they think because they left the church that God relieved them of the assignment. That's not true. You're just AWOL. Now, I'm not trying to get anybody to come back or, not just here, either in a previous church. There are people that go AWOL, they go AWOL. What's that mean? Absent without leave. God didn't grace them to do that. They decided to uproot and do something else. You guys still there? Listen, I learned this in my life years ago. And I've asked the Lord for not recently, so don't think it's about you. It's not. But I asked the Lord multiple times for a change of assignment or a change of location. I've never gone to him and asked and haven't been approved. Everyone's come back denied. And when it's been approved and stamped approved is when I wasn't asking for it or thinking about it. Every time God said time to move is when I'm like, I'm good to be here the rest of my life. Oh, okay, good. Time to get you up and go somewhere else. And I'm not saying God's doing that to mess with you. I'm just saying there's a satisfaction when you're satisfied. It's easier for him to move you. I said this a few weeks ago too. It's funny. Gerald Brooks said this. He goes, most of my people haven't prayed at all until they get offended. Then they pray and pray and pray because they want to leave. You guys still out there? It made all of us laugh that were in the meeting. He goes, I haven't seen them at prayer. They haven't prayed in years up until they got offended. All of a sudden, they're praying a lot, and it's all about leaving and praying about leaving us. Yeah. Anyway, You're a good soldier. What are you going to do? You're going to endure hardship. You have to be tough. You have to suck it up sometimes. Anyone competes as an athlete, he's not crowned unless he competes according to the rules. So athletes have to do what? They don't get to take steroids. No, there's a big shift on that. We all heard about that. What happens? They call that cheating. Why? Because they got results that didn't come naturally. You don't get to take spiritual steroids to jump steps in life. You got to compete by the rules. You got to do what you're supposed to do. You got to be consistent. God doesn't allow you to go from point A to point Z overnight because you're more special than everybody else. You got to grow. You guys still there? What do athletes also have to do? They have to train just like a soldier has to train, but it's different. You see an athlete before, when they're going in fall camp or spring camp or, workouts, what do? They discipline their eating. Why? Because certain foods will actually help you get stronger rather than to get weaker. There's more teaching on nutrition now, but it makes a big difference what you put in your body and how you discipline yourself. You guys still there? You have to have the mindset of a soldier. You have to have the mindset of an athlete. And the last one is this: the hardworking farmer must be first to partake of the crops. You've got to understand that you are a sower in this world. You are someone in this world who's got to sow. And I heard Gerald Brooks say this recently, and it struck me. We've talked about the sower sows the word repeatedly. I've done series on it. I've done messages on it. We do it every year, at least in Mark chapter 4. But he made a point where he said this. He goes, did you notice 75% of the seed sowed didn't get harvested? Which means what? Your job as a sower of the word, probably more people that you sow the word to are going to reject it rather than receive it. Which means it's a thankless job to be a Christian many times for what you're doing. But then he made this statement, but the good thing is some of the seeds fall into the cracks. And regardless of how hard people have been and how challenging it's been, eventually, if you keep doing what you're supposed to do, you're going to start seeing harvest of souls come back. And pastor I met a couple of years ago at a meeting. His name's David Schwann. He's in Clovis, New Mexico. Has a powerful church there. And he said he'd gotten together with a handful of other church leaders in their city, and they did a big outreach. And they had 3 people come to the Lord. It was about $13,000 with all the churches combined. 3 people came to the Lord, and he said they're in a leader meeting, a debriefing leaders meeting afterwards. And they said that was the biggest waste of money. We spent all that money. We brought in guest speakers, brought in musicians, and we rented the community center, and it was an outdoor deal, and only got 3 people out of that. And there was a businessman who was in one of the churches that was there, and he goes, "How much did you spend on that?" And they said $13,000. He goes, "Here." He writes a check. He goes, "Here's a check for $13,000. What you thought was a great waste was a great impact to me because my daughter was one of the 3 that got saved. She's been away from God." And he goes, "She was worth way more than $13,000 that you guys are all complaining about that right now." Our perspective. They're sowing seed. They're acting like it's not doing anything. But yeah, what's the worth of one soul? What's the worth of one person coming to Christ? Let me say a couple of things as we wrap up this morning. John 4:38 says this: "I sent you to reap where you didn't sow. Others did the work, and you received the harvest." Did you know your whole life might be sowing for a future generation? You may not ever see the full fruit of your harvest in this lifetime. And it doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you haven't had great impact. What if one person that you touch in that next generation impacts the world? You don't know. That's why you're called to be faithful. That's why you're called to sow seed as a farmer. And when I tell the story, this is not meant to sound like it's critical of the person. But years ago, I was sitting at home, and I got a phone call, and it was a random phone call from a pastor in another city, and he had heard that we'd had a friend of his in to minister at our church, and said, "Did you just have so and so and so and so?" And yeah, he goes, "I'm good friends with them." Oh, cool. I said, "Well, where are you at?" And he told me, and I said, "How you doing?" He said, "Can I just be honest with you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "It's been rough." He goes, "It's been really rough." And I'm like, "Well, listen, I understand that ministry is challenging. And he said, well, he told me the city. He goes, I came out of the church. The church I was in sent me. And he goes, they're moving and grooving in this city. And he goes, they sent me here, and they brought their worship team down. They rented a hotel for me, and they did this. And he goes, and last Sunday we had like 6 people there. We've been going for a couple of years. And I said, well, tell me about the church you came out of. And he said, well, the pastor, he was in the same years of Bible schools we were at. And I said, well, how did he go there? He goes, well, the Lord kind of put on his heart to go to the city. And they went. And I said, well, how many people knew him there? Nobody. He's not from there. And I said, well, what happened in the church? He goes, they rented a hotel. They rented a hotel room. And the first service, they had 100 people show up. And I may be exaggerating. I think it was 75. They had 75 people show up the first service. I was like, well, how did that happen? Well, there were 3 families that had been praying for someone, a graduate from that Bible school, to come there, and they had a Bible study in their house of 60 people for like 3 years waiting for someone to come. They saw his ad, and they all came, and they brought friends. First service. Well, let me ask you something. Who did the work on that one? The other people that were there praying and believing God. He got to reap the harvest of someone else's prayer. Now, and once again, there's nothing negative. He had to obey God. So he obeyed God, but understand this. Did he do all the work to prepare the harvest on that? And then their church was moving and grooving from day one. I know another pastor in Texas that had this very similar thing happen. He has a large church now, but when he was newest in Bible school, he said, I got 150 people waiting for me to come back. They paid for him to go to Bible school. I thought that would be nice. They paid for him to go to every conference for 2 years that was in the city. Well, that's pretty cool. But he didn't do all the hard work, though. You guys still out there? Now, I'm not saying he didn't work. You understand this. Ministries work no matter what you do. But you might be doing something for somebody else. And listen, let me tell you, it'll be worth it when you stand before the Lord one day. It'll be worth it. It doesn't matter. I've said this a while ago, there's things I've done out here that I've helped other people, I've invested in other people, but I get no credit for. I don't need it.